And welcome. My name is Shannon Kemp, and I'm the Executive Editor for Dataversity. We'd like to thank you for joining today's Dataversity webinar, Metadata Strategies, this year's latest edition in a monthly series called Data Ed Online with Dr. Peter Aiken, brought to you in partnership with Data Blueprint. We at Dataversity are very excited about this particular topic as our tend to keep an eye out for metadata. That's most certainly one of the most popular topics for our subscribers. Now let me turn the floor over to Megan Jacobs, the webinar organizer from Data Blueprint, to introduce our speaker and today's webinar. Megan.
Megan. Hello and welcome. My name is Megan Jacobs, and I'm the webinar coordinator here at Data Blueprint. We're pleased that you found the time to join us for today's webinar on metadata strategies. As always, a big thank you goes out to Shannon and Dataversity for hosting us. We will get started in just a few moments after let you know about some housekeeping items and introduce your presenter. We have 1 hour for the presentation, followed by 30 minutes of Q&A. We will answer as many questions as time allows, but feel free to submit questions as they come up throughout the session. And the top 2 most commonly asked questions. You will receive an email with links to download today's material, as well as the webinar recording so you can view afterwards. These materials will be sent out within the next 2 business days. You can just on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. We set up the hashtag DataEd on Twitter, so if you're logged on, feel free to use it in your tweets and submit your questions and comments that way. We'll keep an eye on the Twitter feed, and we'll include answers to those questions in our post-session email. Let me introduce you to our presenter. Dr. Aiken is an internationally recognized data management thought leader. You may already know him or have seen him at conferences worldwide. He has more than 30 years of experience and has received many awards for his outstanding contributions to the profession. He's also the founding director of Data Blueprint. He has written dozens of articles and 8 books. The most recent is Monetizing Data Management. Peter experience with more than 500 data management practices in 20 countries and consistently named as a top data management expert. The most important and largest organizations in the world have sought out his and Data Blueprint's expertise. Peter spent multi-year immersions with groups as diverse as the U.S. Department of Defense, Deutsche Bank, Nokia, Wells Fargo, the Commonwealth of Virginia, and Walmart. He then appears at conferences and is constantly traveling. Where are you today, Peter?
New York City, where the city is getting ready to go through the annual Veterans Day celebration. And certainly a good day for doing this and for recognizing the contributions of everybody who's come before us and kept us safe. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Shannon. It's good to see everybody today. It's actually really nice because I'm going around and traveling these days. I was at a presentation yesterday at a company. I asked how many people had even heard of the webinar series, and 10 people came up to me and said they were actually following it and were participating in these things. So it's just great. Let's keep that going because that's where we'll keep the dialogue going here. So to get started with metadata, I want to a little shout out to my good friend Eddie, who has been researching this area for a while. He starts off with kind of a dour assessment to this, and I think it's important to sort of set the tone here. Not that it's a youth struggle to do metadata. In fact, many of you are out there doing it very successfully, but the sort of traditional way of doing metadata has pretty much died. He went through and did a calculation and found out that the half-life of these things was about 5%. So, in other words, unless you're really, really good at this, far above average, starting with a major metadata implementation in your organization, you're very much in the exception or the minority around these things. So what we're covering today is we'll start off with the traditional data management overview. We'll look specifically at what is metadata and why is it important. We'll dive some types of metadata, some various subject areas that we're looking at. We look at the benefits of metadata management. And I should clarify here, this is not benefits of metadata per se, but it's the benefits that accrue to organizations if they manage their metadata well. So it's not just by virtue of the fact of having metadata, but it's the entire process that we wrap it up in. Then we'll talk about some strategies and implementation considerations, building blocks, what to do, and finally some important lessons and principles that we want to do. And I'll finish off with something that's been really popular the last couple of times we've done this, which is a specific teachable example, because oftentimes we do find executives that say, okay, I really get this. I want to know more about it. This is a teachable example of something you can do with virtually any computer that you have out there, and it's using iTunes on here. This is, as Megan said, we'll stop at the top of the hour and get into it with you guys about metadata. And usually those are the really interesting parts of the presentation here. Let's start off with our data management overview. And here's what we talk about when we talk about data management. The diagram is not perfect, and I like to quote the box in this area, that all models are wrong, but some models are useful. We've got a useful description of data management, but it doesn't capture one aspect of it. The key, of course, is that we have sources of data that come in, and this is the data when we actually use the data. And in between, we need to have data engineering, storage, data delivery, and of course, governance around it, and all of these require specialized team skills. Now, from this perspective, the only problem I have with this diagram, and I built the diagram, so don't pick it on anybody else at this point. I need to come up with a better way to do it. But maybe you guys can help me. The key, we bring in data, but what we really want to do is that after we engineer it and store it, we want to reuse it. And that reuse is not captured by this diagram here. So again, anybody out there can help it out with our crowdsource it. Maybe somebody can come up with a better description for this. Here's another way that data management is described as well. This is now from the newly released DMMS Structure. DMM stands for Data Management Maturity. NEI has taken research that we've done over the years and pulled together this wonderful model. Perhaps some of you heard the webinar that Melanie Mecca shared with us a couple months back on this topic. If not, we certainly will replay it at some point. So just ping Shannon and tell her you want to hear it again, and she'll for sure get in touch with us, and we'll put it back on the schedule. But the key to this is, as you can see, that there are 5 key processes: data management strategy, data quality, data governance, data operations, data platform architecture, plus a series of supporting processes in gold on the right-hand side of the diagram, listed in black on the other side of the diagram. And when we talk about these things, these are the way in which all of these fit together. Now, a lot of different things that we look at in here. We're talking about managing data coherently, sharing it across boundaries, making sure somebody's personally responsible for building systems, and looking at specific data availability. Again, those are just sort of some highlights on here, but the real important thing to think about from a data management perspective is it's a lot like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Many of you remember Maslow from high school. And if your food, clothing, and shelter needs are unmet, then it's very unlikely that you will go home and self-actualize, whether that's writing music, playing poetry, work others, whatever the particular pieces. And in data management, it is actually very much like that. We have this wonderful golden triangle where it fit into the middle. And again, this list of things that are in the golden triangle has changed considerably over the years. But right now we've got MDM, mining, big data analytics, warehousing. So you could throw different categories in there. That, of course, really does represent just the tip of the iceberg. And because it is just the tip of the iceberg, there's a whole lot more of it. A whole lot more are what we call the foundational data management practices, which fall into the categories of the 5 practice areas that I just described to you a little while ago. The key, of course, for these is that they're all connected by a weak link structure. This entirety of the foundational data management practices provide the foundation. If that foundation is weak, in other words, if your data governance, data quality, metadata strategy, and data operations are very strong in your organization, but your data platform and architecture, as I'm showing here, is weak, the overall foundation can only be strong as the weakest link. And what this means is that most people in the golden triangle are concentrating on technologies, and what we really want them to be concentrating on are capabilities. But of course, the question comes back to us from an awful lot of our customers: can you do those things in the golden part, which is the cool, sexy part that we like to do, with doing the things on the bottom? And the answer is absolutely yes, but it will take you longer, cost more, deliver less, and present greater risk if you instead crawl and walk and run your way to the top. One additional component of this is the data management body of knowledge. We've been talking about these all and off all throughout. Those other seminars that she runs on here also cover a lot of these as well. This is a data DIMBOK wheel. If you're not familiar with it, you should get familiar with it because the data management plays an important role. It's one of the 10 areas within the DIMBOK wheel. The key for all of this, of course, is the DIMBOK comprises the data management body of knowledge that we're looking at. It's organized around the wheel, and what we're trying to do is help you all become certified as professional data managers to a group of about 2,000 select individuals worldwide who have these knowledge, skills, and abilities. From the DIMBOK perspective here, again, This is our overview, and again, I'm going to walk through all of the details here, but it does represent what we're going to cover from an inputs side. You can see we have lots of input suppliers, participants. We have a lot of activities that we use in the middle of it, and then the outputs are the various deliverables where the consumers are describing it. So that's the context in which metadata management occurs. Now we're talking about what is metadata, and before we do that, we really need to start out by talking about what a strategy is. A strategy, most people think of a binder document that sits on a shelf somewhere, and some people look at occasionally. Actually, the strategies only come into popular use about 1950. Before that, it was exclusively in the military domain. But what it means is not a document. It means it's a pattern and a stream of decisions. Now, of course, the part most everybody forgets is that the document is supposed to inspire us to work and to come up with a pattern in those stream of decisions if we're all pulling in the right direction. Again, a little bit of confusion about how the term is linked. You'll see it typed as metadata, metadata, or metadata. When two words are pasted together to form a consonant initially, the hyphen links them. Over time, the passage gets lost. There is a copyright on the term metadata, but it has just not been enforced over the years. It does make it kind of interesting, though. So we're going to talk about, from this point onwards, is just metadata, one word. Now, to define it, first of all, it's everywhere. It is to data what data is to real life. Data represents the real transactions. Metadata represents the data around these transactions that we're talking about. Hay has a great book out on this where he gets into this data that's used to describe the structured workings of an organization's use of information, which describes the systems that manage that information. Two Gartner definitions here. The first one's okay, data describing various facets of a data asset for the purpose of improving its ability for life cycle. Try to do that in an elevator speech someday with your boss when they look over you and say, I don't understand metadata, what is it? If you say, well, it's data describing various facets of the data asset for the purpose of improving usability throughout its life cycle, they're kind of going to look at you funny. So Gartner updated their definition in 2011 and said, how about this one? Metadata unlock the value of data. Really good, short, concise definition. But they have a second clause that goes with it. Meta unlocks the value of data and therefore requires management attention. I love that definition. So if we're talking about metadata, then metadata management is a set of processes that ensure proper creation, storage, integration, and control used to support metadata. And it comes to many people's mind when they think about metadata is the infamous card catalog. Many of you remember this, although some of you are younger and don't remember the old days when we used to go to libraries because that's where the books were. And these card catalogs helped us figure out where the books were. But these identify what books in the library were located. Was searched by various subject areas. So you see I've got a couple examples of a John Grisham novel up there that are organized by subject area, by author, also by the title of the book. And many things that you can include. This is a typical library card catalog, but you can see how it works. We would go to the library, we would look through 3 by 5 cards, they would tell us a little bit about the book and determine whether the book matched our needs. We're looking for a piece of data, and you're not sure which one it is. This type of additional helpful information will help you to make sure that you actually deliver the data to your customers that they have it. Without the catalog, finding things in the library is difficult, time-consuming, and frustrating. You know what? Finding data can be equally as frustrating. So metadata is the card catalog of the metadata, of the data managed environment. Metadata are the descriptive tags. In addition to that, they show business and technical users where to find information in the data repositories that you have around your organization. It provides details on where the data came from, how it got there, what types of transformations, and if you're really advancing your metadata practices, it provides quality information and provenance information as well. And it provides us with assistance unlocking the value of that data. And one of the groups I worked with liked to represent it this way. So a terrific representation. They said it's very simple. It's any combination of the circle, data at the center, and anything on the outside, which you can see correspond to the columns of the Zach framework, who, where, when, why, and how. Great little articulation, worked really well for this particular organization. Look at it in more specifics. We can actually say, okay, well, let's put the library book at the center. The who is the author, the what is the title, the where, the shelf location, the when is the publication date. Again, this small amount of metadata in the card catalog unlocks the value of a large amount of data. If you're having trouble with that example, various Outlook pieces, and Shannon and Megan and I were talking about Outlook just before we got on with everybody today. Outlook, good luck to organize your email without it. How, where, why, and when. Okay, so priority, user ID, body, and you use Outlook and other email tools to find the important stuff and weed out the unimportant stuff. No, I don't need the donuts, but I want the important mail from my boss to go right to the top. Imagine how managing email, which is already non-trivial, which if Outlook didn't make use of the metadata, for example, from and to, in other words, the who metadata that we put around this. So we take a step back at metadata practices. They look suspiciously like data management practices. Again, we have sources of metadata. We do this thing called metadata engineering, metadata storage, metadata delivery, and metadata governance. And again, each of these you can see are defined in exactly the same way as they are in data management. Now, the key for this, as approaching our first polling question here, is that metadata is data. The way to manage data is by best data management practices, as I described to you in the first section of this event here on this. So if metadata is data, we should manage it in at least as good fashion as we manage our data. There are some other things that we're talking about as well, but we want to ask you guys some questions because we go through these things and we actually do put together a series of deliverables around this, and we'll get a blog post out on this question pretty quickly on it. We're looking at trends, so we want you guys to tell us. We're an organization beginning to use or planning to use a formal approach to metadata management. And just tell us last year, this year, or next year, we'll compare those with the rest of them. We have a scientifically engineered sample of 42 seconds designed to capture your information on this, and we'll give it just a quick second on that, and then I'll put last year's results and we can see how we're doing compared to last year. Interestingly, I have my own suspicions about where this is going to go, but we're interested in your thoughts on it.
Looks like we've got them in. Yeah, it looks like that. I'm just trying to get the results up. Give me 1 second.
Here's our last year results to put up there for everybody to see.
All right, they should be in.
So there are people who started last year, 10% this year. And a lot of you haven't done metadata at all, so that's really interesting. Let's look at the sample sizes on these, but most of these are scientifically significant sample sizes. So again, we'll get you a little bit of trend information on that and hopefully send out the rest of the information out there. So now that you have a good idea of what metadata is and why it's important, let's talk about the metadata subject areas that we need to learn. The things here are not that we tell you these are important, but you look at your own environment and see what's important to what you're doing. Because while I can sit here and pontificate it all, you all are the experts who can talk about this. One type of metadata is, of course, process metadata. If you're in a regulatory environment, process metadata can be incredibly important. Starbucks needs to be able to understand and prove, in fact, that when you pay X number of dollars for a cup of coffee, that amount of money goes to hit their revenue sheets and eventually works its way into their profit category. You have to prove that to make no confidence in their financial information. So we look at it from a process perspective. This process perspective, you see who created the documentation, what are the important dependencies among the processes, and how do the business processes interact with each other. As some of the things that are important for metadata from that perspective. Again, from a business metadata perspective, we see an awful lot of things. Describe the business names, the attribute data values, the ranges, the algorithms, the business rules, and things that we use to categorize all of this information. Another type of metadata is technical and operational metadata, which is where's the physical database that we're trying to get access to. Again, it may talk about the conditions, the load balancing, the things that you need to look at from that perspective on here. Again, audit controls, information on balancing books at the end of the year, archiving and retention rules. Some of you are subject, for example, to making sure that your inbox is only of a certain size or that you delete things. Our university, Virginia Commonwealth University, we are under a 3-year retention policy. We need to make sure that we retain all of the information of certain types for a 3-year period and then don't retain it after that. So again, interesting work that we do in that type of thing. Let's talk about stewardship metadata. And again, these labels are not sacrosanct. These are labels that give you general categories of things. You are, again, the one who's going to take a look at this and say what works for me. So the stewards, again, who are the data stewards? What are the stewardship processes? What are the assignments? Again, you don't want stewards fighting over who's responsible for that, but at the same time, we do want to make sure at least one person is in charge of all of your critically important data that's out there. And these stewards are charged with making sure that the metadata is accurate, so they're going to have additional information that they're going to put in place on this. So again, business goals, drivers. So you may not be familiar with CRUD. CRUD stands for a matrix. Oops, I'm sorry, I went one page fast, so I'm going to back up here. CRUD is a matrix that we use in information engineering that talks about create, read, update, and deleting information as crossed with various business processes. Very, very useful type of data stewardship metadata that we use. Who are data owners? What are the sharing rules, et cetera, et cetera. Another category of metadata, provenance. Provenance means where did it come from? Get data and it's coming from a suspect source. I should be a little bit careful about where it's used, or if I get data from a trusted source or a proven source, I might have more confidence in the type of information it's describing here. Again, it's this type of thing for each individual datum. It could be a source, any derivation, the data was created, what type of program created it, again, who is the owner, even if they're not part of our organization, what are the rules for sharing. And there's lots of these categories here. Again, I'm not going to go through each one of these things here. This is reference information for you all to take away. But you can see there's just many, many areas that we can talk about different forms of data. The point here, of course, is not to acquire metadata for its sake, but to, in fact, tie it to a specific business idea. We're to manage this metadata for this reason so that we can do it. And again, whatever the particular example is that you're working in your area. There's what benefits to managing metadata. It helps us to increase value of strategic information. When we put data into a data warehouse, we might want to know things like the provenance. Where did it come from? Oh, great, the sales figures came from estimates. They didn't come from actuals. We might want to fix that, right? The metadata can help us to reduce the overall cost of training and staff turnover. This is the way in which you get all that wonderful material that's in our knowledge workers' heads. So many of our knowledge workers are at this point in time close to retirement. So there's a number of organizations that have risk programs around good knowledge in their organizations walking out of the organization when these people retire. Again, that can reduce the research time that's involved. It can help communicate better between business and IT professionals. Literally, the metadata is what we talk about when we talk about getting on the same sheet of paper. Additionally, this is not as well known, but it can help us speed up time to market or system development life cycle time by having these definitions, thereby reducing risk of project failure and other things that occur in the organization when it's problematic. And finally, we really do want to get rid of all of our data rot out there. As some of you remember from some of the other ones that we've done here, data rot is the idea that much of our data is redundant, obsolete, and therefore we shouldn't manage it. We, of course, also have metadata for semi-structured data. I don't really like the term unstructured data because if something was truly unstructured, you couldn't structure it. That's the definition of unstructured. We can talk about semi-structured data and bring it in when we're talking about catalog information. So a lot of the work I did for Nokia evolved around something called the Nokia Term Bank. And the Nokia Term Bank were the official definitions used by Nokia engineers as they were developing various product sources and things in the product that they were in at the time. And lots of different examples. Here's a very specific example, though. This was some metadata that we worked on for one of the organizations that we were with, and they had some existing reference models. The ADRM model, which is many of you know is a retail model. They had a conceptual model that they had created as well. They had reverse engineering information from some of their existing systems, and they also had an enterprise data model, and all of these things combined to make up the bulk, if you will, of their metadata operation. So again, a lot of different applications and sources that we can look at. These are all very, very interesting, but again, it goes back to what is your strategy. If you don't have a purpose, then don't collect the metadata. If you have a purpose, something you're trying to do, then metadata can be invaluable in helping you solve the problem. I just start out with a little bit of Dave Eddy's research. And what he was looking specifically at were the metadata repository, wherein an organization would have one place that they stored all of their metadata. One of the earliest jobs in data management was in the late 80s and the early 90s when I worked for the U.S. Department of Defense and was in fact responsible for feeding the metadata repository. Now, this is a really good thing in the sense that in the early days, late 80s in particular, the Department of Defense found themselves to understand more holistically what they were doing from a data and process perspective. And we were part of a group in there that kept focused on these types of activities. We kind of set the standard, and a lot of people like to say there's nothing good ever comes out of the federal government. I do disagree strongly with them on that. This is an example of where the federal government was out ahead of industry in many cases. Did things that were more lasting. Even something like NEAM, some of you are familiar with the National Enterprise Information Model, is derived and has its roots in what happened here. So we have this sort of history whereby, yeah, we have some metadata stuff, and of course some of the stuff we were doing in defense at the time we couldn't tell people about, but we were able to share in order to do this. In the 90s then, business managers kind of began to recognize the value of these repositories, and they brought on new scope. They, for example, would add something like a semantic layer between the company's system and the business users, so that we could automatically translate technical terms into business terms. That we could look at, again, very specific reductions in training costs because it was much easier to bring people up to speed in this area. We could take the strategic information and make it more valuable as decision makers. The other thing we were working on too was changing behaviors. Once we had a source of authoritative metadata, we then worked on the executives so that they would begin to depend on this. Again, if I get back to the Nokia example, the Nokia question that they would ask, is this term in the Nokia term bank? And it wasn't. They had a good process for making sure that it got in the term bank, and they were able to use it from that point onwards. Again, towards the end of the 90s, people became consumed with the Y2K deadline. We obviously used metadata because metadata was what told us where all the 2-digit date fields were that had to be expanded to 4-digit date fields. So where they were, we could change them. If we didn't change them, that stuff would have happened. I do get offended when people say that Y2K was a waste of time and effort in the sense that we didn't actually accomplish anything. That stuff was going to happen, and thousands of IT professionals worked really hard to make sure it didn't. Should we have had to do it? It's a different question. But remember, when I started computing, we thought that 256 kilobytes on an IBM mainframe computer was the cat's meow. Again, standardization effort followed this. We ended up with something out of the Department of Defense called CDIF, which was Case Tool Definition Interchange Facility. It allowed us to change metadata from one case tool to another. 1985 also saw the release of the Dublin Core, which is very, very useful for library science types of technologies in here. So 11179, the specification and standardization of data elements were published. 1998, the Common Warehouse Metadata Model. The Metadata Coalition's Open Information Model. These were merged to another organization later on and do give us some ongoing types of activities that we'll use. We'll come circle back on some of those a little later in the presentation on this. Again, it's the ability for us to understand what's actually happening here, but here's the problem. There are relatively few people out there in the real world with these kind of skills, and I'm just amazed when I watch these various glowing presentations on the data scientist, and they never seem to mention the word metadata. Now, that to me is a big problem, because if a data scientist doesn't understand how to use metadata, the data scientist can only be a certain level of productivity. So there's a scarcity of people with these skills. There are very few programs that actually teach this have to depend on organizations like DAMA and Dataversity to get this type of education out there. I'm not sure I would suggest that every student should have a course in metadata, but by golly, every student should have a course in data as far as I go. And the reason for that is because we've even seen the President of the United States use the term metadata. Some examples of why metadata matters. These are courtesy of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. So when the President says, well, they're only collecting the metadata about your call, what does that mean? Well, they know you rang a phone text service at 2:24 a.m. and spoke for some time to somebody on the other end, but they don't have any idea what you talked about. Or they know you called a suicide prevention hotline from the Golden Gate Bridge, but the topic of the call remains a secret. And again, I won't read all of these things here, but you can see the kind of things that would be important just from a metadata management perspective. Forget about the actual data in there. Let's move a little further and talk about what would be the elements that would go into a metadata strategy. And the key is it's a statement of direction. Remember, it's a pattern of decision. So if you make a statement of direction, you'd hope that statement, that policy would guide the decisions of people in the organization to talk out how we're going to use metadata by the enterprise. Now, this is not a matter of, yes, we're going to use metadata, or no, we're not. You are always using metadata all the time. The question is, how much and structure around your metadata practices are you going to install? And more importantly, which data items are we going to collect metadata on? The answer cannot be every one of them. It doesn't work. It's too much. So again, the statement of intent acts as a reference for developing the very teams, and again, it should be driven by specific business objectives. You may take an organization that is starting to do this, and we're going to build a metadata repository to help with the implementation of a new ERP. That's actually a very useful thing to do. We published some work in the early 90s, or late 90s, on how useful that in fact could be, and we're glad to pass that on to anybody that wants a copy of it to take a look at it. Again, the focus, we're trying to gain an understanding of the key business programs and relate to the problem we're trying to solve, and we need to know how the current environment is going to reflect those, able to make use of the metadata. Believe me, if you use metadata, you will get to important questions a lot quicker than you will if you're doing without metadata. Only 1 in 10 organizations has a documented board-approved data strategy. Many fewer have actual metadata strategies. So of course you need to do in terms of the implementation, you look at the data planning and initiation and see what are we going to do, where are we now, what are the things we're capable of, what are the things we're not capable of. Let's some realistic objectives as opposed to we're going to manage all our metadata by the end of the week. By the way, it's Tuesday already, right? We're going to have some interviews with full and find out what they need to have to do their job better. We're going to try and find that metadata and manage it. We're going to access the existing metadata sources within our information architecture. And again, some people say, but I don't have a metadata architecture. And I simply say that's not true. All organizations have information architecture and metadata. The question is whether you know where it is and make use of it, as opposed to having to do it. If you want to look at what your future state should be, oh great, we have some metadata now, and we'd like to add the ERP that we're going to be starting to implement into that piece, and then develop a phased approach to the metadata enterprise on this. So again, we get to our next polling question for all of you all. Given that compliance laws have influenced my organization, what are those compliance laws helping you all? Is it focusing your metadata on data quality, on metadata management, on data management, or is compliance having no impact on your organization at all? Again, we'll give you about 42 seconds to give us some feedback on here. I've already put up last year's answers on this. We'll compare the two as Megan gets it all together and lets us know what's going on. And I need that Jeopardy theme music. I won't sing. That'll be bad for you guys.
It's up. We need to find that.
I'm somewhere on my phone, but I'm using my phone at the moment.
Oh, darn. All right, so everything has, all the answers have come in. Let me get this, let me get the results up for you guys. Give me 1 second.
I have absolutely no idea what Megan's doing there, but some kind of magic that she knows how to run, that she and Shannon do in the background. So thank you guys for keeping those details from me, because I would probably screw them up.
No problem.
There you go.
Should be up.
It is 16%. Last year was 30% for data quality. Metadata management still right 6%, 18% for database management in general, and no impact at all, 10% there. So if you aren't answering, hey, come on, this is class participation time, you guys. We want to know what you're thinking out there. So the building blocks for metadata. The key, of course, to all of this is within the context of your metadata strategy, data items are going to be made more valuable by understanding the terms and niche. We integrate that metadata from various diverse sources. One of the projects we're working on in the Commonwealth of Virginia right now is looking at specific citizen data. I don't have a one citizen ID that we use to track citizens across the entire Commonwealth. So we have to go in and integrate this metadata from various diverse sources. If we can do that, we can get a better picture of the needs of the citizens of the Commonwealth and provide their service to them. An initiative, by the way, that's coming out of the Secretary of Technology's office. There's some really interesting things happening there on that. We want to make sure that once we've captured this metadata, we don't go lock it up someplace where nobody can get to it. We've got to have it accessible, and most importantly, don't mean by SQL. Executives do not understand how to do database queries. So you put it somewhere where they can browse through the metadata, point and click, and a lot of good products that we can talk about. There, we won't dive into a lot of them at this point, but there are some really, really fine products that will allow you to do. Some of these companies have been in business doing this for 20 or 30 years on this. Finally, of course, from a goals perspective, we don't want to put garbage in and garbage out into our metadata any more than we want to put garbage in and garbage out into our data. It just makes no sense whatsoever. Activities that you're going to do around a specific metadata strategic initiative is that you're going to understand those requirements and you're going to define the architecture. And let me just take a second and describe what that might look like in theory. If at keeping track of the entities and the attributes that are involved in a certain file management system, we know that the relationship is that an entity should have one and only one definition, that it should have one or attributes. And some of those attributes may or may not be designated as key attributes. Again, so you are really good modelers and are building this in your head already. If you're having trouble with that, we've got an older that we did on there that actually go through and build some of these things in real time during one of the sessions. Again, if you want to learn about that, it's up there, I think, on the Dataversity website in the archive section on that. The thing you want to do is you want to talk about what sort of standards you're going to need within that architecture. Because if we define a year field as only 2 dates, I know it sounds like a nutso idea, but that's the way we did it in the days because space is precious, and we of course now know that space is almost free. We want to maintain those standards. We want to implement them in some form of a managed metadata environment. Now, one of the things that we found over the years is that many organizations go out and buy a very large product. I know of one organization that worked with on and off over the years. It's had a metadata repository and been paying a license fee on it for a long time, but has never actually taken the thing off shelf. The metadata is important, but they can't kind of figure how it should go into their business practice. So we've tried to help them out, and they're just not quite ready yet to do this. So it's actually kind of good for the vendor because they get the revenue, but it's sort of sad for the vendor because it really does have a good product that they want to use. Now, if you don't have a managed metadata environment, you can build one. The analogy here is kind of like a kid that wants to start out with a pet. You know, mommy, daddy, I want a dog. Dogs are cute. I want a puppy, actually. Well, puppy, great. Here's an electronic puppy. It has to be walked every 3 hours and fed at least twice a day, and if it doesn't, your electronic puppy will die. Of course, so the kids get this, they don't pay attention to it, and the electronic version of the dog dies, and luckily they don't have to worry. The parents go buy the real dog, and then the parents have to take care of it. Well, metadata environment, if you go out and spend too much money too soon before your organization is ready for it, you will be unsuccessful, and the vendor will be unsuccessful there. So what we'd like you to do is build an environment like that for yourself, and you go, oh my God, that's a lot of work. No, actually it isn't. It's a very, very simple process that you can use. Create things that will make you better able to have a conversation with the vendors because you'll be able to uncover through your use of this production-oriented metadata environment, then we'll actually discover what your real business use of metadata are. And if you discover them, you're much better equipped to have a conversation with the various vendor communities that, again, provide terrific sets of products and things around here. The key also is that once you develop this environment, you need to create and maintain the metadata, and fairly often you're going to have to integrate and reintegrate the metadata. When we do our little repository-like functionality and build this little thing I was telling you about a second ago, one of the hardest things for us to find is a database person that's willing to rebuild the metadata repository as many as 100 times in a week. And of course, I keep saying, but just tell me what you want. And the answer is you don't know at this point. You've got to build it, use it, and try to see how it happens. So if you find that rare breed of a database administrator who's willing to build these things for you over and over and over again, you have many more opportunities to get it right than organizations that build something, put it in, and then try and make it fit to the way they work. Finally, I said before, you do not want to put the stuff in. And again, I spent the summer of 1993, I believe it was, literally in the basement of the Pentagon, shoveling metadata elements into DoD data repository. The project had a not very good face, and it was very difficult to miss it. So we had good information, it was hard to get to. The key, of course, is to distribute and deliver your metadata. And by the way, I forgot to say something earlier as well, which is that if we take this in another direction, which is very popular these days, data governance, the language of data governance is almost 100% metadata. Now that starts to get people's attention. It's like, oh, so everything we're talking about in data governance is metadata. And it's like, well, it probably should be. And finally, of course, now that you've got your metadata in a data management environment, you can now start to query, report, analyze the environments as well. And that will be much more helpful to you in the long run as you go through it. There are a number of different standards that we look in here. There are two major types of standards. There are industry or consensus standards, and of course, then there are the international standards that are done. This is a high-level framework that shows how the two standards are related. Again, it's sometimes as simple as, well, we'd like to do it this way, but here's how vendor X does it, therefore, that's how we're going to do it. Again, a little bit more detail than we can go into here in order to look at it, but just understand that de facto standards can become important as well. Many of you have observed over time that the DM-BUCK, our body of knowledge, has become a de facto standard in that area, and we are expecting to see the same kind of results around DMM from the SEI that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation on here. So there are a set of standards that you can access right at the moment. These are a group called the Common Warehouse Metadata. People observed over time that they were building warehouses, and a lot of warehouses had some similarities between them. So decided to try and categorize all together what the standards look like. In other words, if you're building a standard data warehouse, of course everybody's data warehouse is special, but you know what, when you look at them from a high-level perspective, they have a lot of similarities in them. There are a set of well-defined metadata standards already exist for these data warehouses, so you don't have to invent anything from the bottom. Most importantly, if you're working with contractors that are encouraging you to invent your own, I would very much push back on them and say, show me why we shouldn't use the ones that are out there, because there's no point in reinventing the wheel in this case. Other really good set of Metamodel standards here are the Information Management Metamodel here, also by the Common Warehouse Metadata Group, and you can see some of the things that we're putting up on here, ontologies based on the core model. Again, you can quickly and easily derive XML structures if that's important from here in all of these things. But the real key here is that once you have this managed environment, you can then translate these things one to the other. And this was the CF origin on this. And of course, we use, oh my goodness, I'm going to forget this one. Where David Allen, what I need him to do, is a common XML standard for this as well. And it'll pop into my brain in a minute. There is an XML component in here we can use as well. So that overall here are the deliverables from a metadata project. There should be a repository of metadata. Now, again, I don't mean go out and buy a metadata repository. As much as the vendors would like you to do that, they also want you to be happy customers. So it's talking about what your capability is, and your metadata repository could very well be developed in SQL Server and done and delivered very, very nicely. In addition to that, of course, you need to have quality metadata. If you have poor quality metadata, there's no way that you're going to have good quality data out there. You're going to need to analyze what you're doing with metadata and how it fits in. Now, we use this high-level term metadata analysis, but this is really about delivering business value at this point and saying, if we had tried to build this system without this metadata in the ERP example that I used a minute ago, it would have taken longer and cost more. And by the way, how much longer and how much more cost would have been involved are very good things to include in your analysis so that management does understand what you're talking about. We also need to understand the data lineage. This is especially important in the merger and acquisitions area, where you're offloading from a mainframe and you're trying to move into a more agile environment. Again, all of these are incredibly important. None happens well without good change management. Again, if I decided that 4 digits wasn't enough for the date and we needed to expand everything to 5 digits, I hope everybody's got their metadata up to speed and we could all have that in by Friday, right? No, I could just be done by 9999. By the way, there's a joke around that that says COBOL will still be around in those days too. I can hear some of you chuckling. Again, metadata control procedures. Do you want anybody to be able to add anything to the dictionary, or should you have a filtered process where the quality assurance function that makes sure it goes in? Back to the Nokia term bank that I talked about earlier. When they found a new term, there was a process. It was a form. They would submit the term, the proposed definition, and a group of architects at Nokia would look at this and say, yes, maybe tweak the definition a bit. Maybe say, we're using a different term for that, so we're not going to use that term. Here is our preferred term. We'll go ahead and put this in as a synonym, so one of you that don't understand the synonyms are able to at least gain access to the valuable data that's out there. Again, your metadata models and your architecture can become very interesting and useful intellectual property for you. And finally, you've got to look and say, how is your metadata management environment working? One of the customers that we work with also has a terrific metadata management environment that for their business needs, they tied very tightly to their production system. What means is that if production goes down, metadata goes down. And if metadata goes down, production goes down. Now, I'm recommending that as a strategy for all of your organizations, but one of the organizations that we work with has, in fact, made a decision that is an incredibly important role for them to work in, and they've done exactly that. It's a really, really fine system. I wish I could show it to you. Again, who's going to be involved in this? We have our various suppliers, the stewards, the architects, the model notice. These are mainly coming from our data community. And then, of course, we have business subject area experts that we need to add as the participants, also as the customers of the metadata. And finally, we have our consumers that we put up on all of this. It's a good idea to develop a map that shows how all of these interact and who's zooming in this case. We've used these things for over 20 years and found them incredibly helpful. And the component of all this is what technology. We've already talked about the repository. You can go buy lots of them, and they're very good products. But most organizations we find are not at the level of maturity to be able to effectively use these. Of course, talking metadata, you also need to have modeling tools, database management systems that you're using, integration tools. Talking to somebody today who was talking about ab initio maps. Okay, if you're an ab initio shop, it's a very fine product, and you all are going to be very familiar with ab initio does these things. Again, system management tools, object modeling tools, whatever you have out there that works. And the little word of caution, I taught an undergraduate class this last semester, and they don't even use case tools. So the kids are graduating from our office and yes, programs without having any idea what even a case tool is. It's just astounding to me. And if you get a chance to voice your opinion on that, which I'm sure agrees with me that these are an important component to these things, you need to get those things back in the curriculum. I'll ask you our third polling question here. Do you use metadata models or other modeling tools to support your information quality efforts? Simple yes or no on this one. But again, you can see last year's responses, 49 and 39%.
We have about 25 seconds left. We've got a lot of answers rolling in. Let's see here.
You guess what my sounds are, Megan?
No, are you rolling dice? Are you playing dice again, Peter?
That would be a bad thing. Just ice cubes everywhere. You certainly got the floor of it.
During this time is just to figure out the sound, right?
Oh, we can do that.
Guess the sound. Yeah. Always some extra time. All right, the results are in. Let me get these good for you guys. Let's see here.
Again, we're behind the scenes magic, Megan.
Trying to. Let's see if this works. Oh, they should be up.
40%. So we're seeing a little less in the area here. And we'll come back and look at these trends over a couple of years and hopefully give you some additional information after we finish this. So again, Megan and I are going to work on that a couple days after we finish this particular piece. So let's talk about some guiding principles in metadata. And I'm going to put these up as 15 principles. Again, briefly go over them, but really they're more for reference for you all. Again, the key is to establish and maintain the strategy and the appropriate policies and goals. Make clear objectives for how we're going to use metadata. Make sure that you secure some sort of sustained funding. This is not a project, it is a program, and we need a programmatic attention to it. Just like buying an ERP, you don't install it and then never have any costs that are associated with it. Take the view, you're only metadata engineering around one particular aspect or one even program that you're doing. We'll to isolate that program and look at it relative to other programs that are not working in a managed metadata environment and compare and contrast. And you may end up with the easiest case that many customers have ever done. They simply look at this and go, well, it was, in case, a factor of 10 easier to implement with metadata than it was without managed metadata. Your strategy, if you don't have a strategy, any tool, any product, any process will get you to the right answer, and that's, of course, not going to meet needs. We add the roles of standards within that, ensure that you have effective processes for acquisition of internal as well as external metadata. Make sure that your users get access to it. Too many people put time and effort into the capture portion of the diagram, and not enough people look at the delivery portion of it. If you haven't got a customer for your metadata, people are going to say, why are we doing this? And understand, communicate. It's good examples, and that's why I said I'd leave today with a really easy example to show people. Measure your content and usage that's there. Specifically to XML, because XML does have some very nice capabilities that complement this. I've got an old book out there called XML and Data Management that actually dives into that in a lot more detail on that. Then look specifically around stewardship, because again, if data stewards are charged with implementing governance around your organization, around your organization's sole non-depletable, non-degrading, durable strategic asset, which they're speaking had better be data governance and metadata within that context, or else they're just going to be talking past each other. People can agree on things, but if we don't have them agree to correct things, we don't really have a value that occurs. Again, develop implementation and monitoring processes. And when you find a group that isn't following processes, find out what it is they're trying to do and how your metadata practice does not support them. See what you can do to change it. Look specifically at training, expectations for people on the win, and there's at least a couple people in your organization that you'd consider to be metadata experts. Think of another organization right now that has to attest, a little bit stronger word than certify in their areas. And testing has got people paying a lot of attention to how this works out. I attest that the data is of a certain quality or that the metadata is correct, whatever it is we're looking at. That word attest, people pay attention to that. So again, it's not applicable about all industries and things, but it is something that is becoming more and more useful around us. I mentioned that we'd finish here at the top of the hour with a very specific teachable example. Because oftentimes we get an executive or business person who says, look, I kind of get all this stuff. I heard your webinar. I understand it. I need something concrete that I can really put my arms around. So here's an iTunes example. Now, you stick a CD in a computer that has iTunes running on it. Remember, iTunes runs on the Mac as well as the PC. Without metadata, it figures from the CD itself that there are 25 tracks and the length of each track on that CD. And if your favorite song is track 01 and you have 100 CDs that all have track 1 on them, seeing what you're attempting to do musically is going to be very, very difficult. So when you stick CDs in, again, record and iTunes can count the number of tracks, the length of the track, and something happens in the top of your iTunes. It goes out to a database that is by GraceNote Media. And the GraceNote Media database is an attempt by GraceNote Media to catalog all of the metadata around CDs. Notice what comes back from GraceNote is, wow, I took the time and the titles, 1 through 5 and 2.34 down to 4.23, and now I've added name, art, album, genre. All this metadata is kind of interesting and getting kind of useful. Now, the way you could show this in your PC, when you stick a CD in, and just unplugging it from the internet. And you'll out right here with this stuff and say, this is very useful. This is our data looks like right now, boss. It's out there. We know it's good. The track 01 is a pretty cool tune, but I can't tell you much more about it other than it's 2 minutes and 34 seconds long, and it's called track 01. But as soon as we get past that and add the metadata to it, we know it's now the song Move by Miles Davis. On the album, The Complete Birth of the Cool. Look further. Again, notice Grace retrieved the CD name, the artist, the track name, the genre. Oh yeah, so the artwork come back as well. So we can get the artwork from it. And it would be a pain to type in all of this information, would it not? And the answer is, of course, yes. Now, if I want to get a little bit more sophisticated with my metadata management within iTunes, I use iTunes to develop a smart playlist. And I can say, give me a playlist where the artist contains Miles Davis. Go in and find the albums that were related to Miles Davis. However, that list is I had already out there in my collection another Miles Davis album. Notice again here, this one is Live at the Fillmore. It's About the Time is what they called that particular live CD. So by putting in show me the things that were live that were Miles Davis, I didn't get the desired results. I already had this other Miles Davis tune that was out there. And I've got to be able to fine-tune it by adding in that selection for the smart album, The Birth of the Cool. Now I can actually get my Miles Davis playlist into a folder for jazz stuff. And by that example works the same way in iTunes for all of the other things that you have in iTunes, whether they are TV shows, whether they are books, pictures, other things that you put into iTunes. So the nice part about the metadata management is it also teaches us another important concept about reusability. The fact that I've built the metadata environment around my recording makes it very easy to transfer it to my collection of TV shows or whatever it is I'm looking specifically for in that. Same test. The data all applied for iPods, these books, files. The economies of scale are absolutely enormous in this. So we're right at the top of the hour here again. Again, takeaways on this metadata unlock the value of data, and it requires management attention. Great definition from Gartner. Again, love to get some help while redoing this diagram here. Metadata is the language of data governance. Metadata defines the essence of specific integration challenges. We're right at the top of the hour, and we want to ask you guys a specific question around this. Again, we've metadata, and we're going to talk about complex data architectures and things like that. But just before we're getting to the question and answer session, we've got one more tracking question we're trying to get to. I do include a series of references and recommend reading in here. There's 4 pages of them that you can take a look at on here. Our last question: my organization began using or planning to use a metadata repository, whether it's purchased or homegrown. We want to know, was it last year, this year, or is it next year that you're planning to do it? Help us with some tracking, and as I said before, we'll get a little bit of information to you on what's going on in trends in the area.
Oh, we have a few seconds left. Let's see here. Results up for everybody. It looks like a good time there, Peter. Right at 3. I was a little worried, but it's good.
I hate to admit it, but I am a professional at this, right?
Indeed.
Can somebody really be professional at this, right?
Well, enough times. All right, the results are up.
So let's move to press on the slide. So last year, I have these numbers tracking. That's right, we're going to go back and find those. I can put together these things over the next couple of days and see if we can come up with some little additional information so you know a little bit more about the trends in this. So now it's time to go to our favorite part of the program, where we can actually have you guys ask us some questions. I'm curious if Dave is out there on the line. I had certainly alerted him we're going to use material in this. And see if he has anything he wants to start off saying these things.
Oh, Peter, that was a great presentation. Now it's time for Q&A. Time for you all to ask your questions. So just click on the Q&A window feature at the top of your screen. You should be able to submit your questions through that Q&A window. And we've already had some roll in, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And the first question is, executives are concerned about sharing metadata with employees, which defeats the purpose. Any suggestions on how to address that?
Sure, so that's a great question. If executives are paranoid that they might discover that employee theft is caused largely by employees, they've got other thing coming on them. So let's look back at information access in general. If you're going to do information access and make sure that certain people get access to certain information and others should not get access to it, there's an absolutely reasonable business practice. But cut off at a metadata level is really not the way you want to do this. By doing that process, what you're doing is you're ensuring that your good knowledge workers who are working really hard for your organization are going to spend more time solving problems that you're asking them to solve than they would otherwise. And if you would, telling somebody that you wanted them to do a report but they couldn't use Google. That same type of analogy there. Now, I'm not saying that you should gain access to the entire company's metadata, but to block metadata in general from a company just seems to me to be defeating the purpose.
Next question is, our research customers expect metadata with the data? Metadata is assumed to be free. How does one justify the cost and need for skilled resources to develop and maintain the metadata?
What a great question. So let's go back to our point here. Again, the metadata unlocks value of data. If the metadata was not valuable, you would simply not be charging for it. You would be providing it for free. Of course, if I toss the number 42 out there for you, most of you are going, what does the number 42 mean? Well, I'll give you 2 meanings. It's either my age 13 years ago, or it's the meaning of life, the universe, and everything. Now, it's a difference which one it is, doesn't it? So, absolutely. Metadata, just give the definition. Metadata unlocks the value of data. If they want it for free, right now, you, an information provider, may very well say one of the things that differentiates us from everybody else is we don't give you raw numbers. We give you the numbers and give you the metadata that allows you to place those numbers in context. But I've got more of a carrot and stick approach on that. And again, I don't know your business. I can't answer specifically in it, but we've worked with enough companies that do this type of process. Most of these organizations realize that while their data is good, their metadata is actually the more valuable product they have. So I'll leave it at that. If you want to take it offline with it, we'll be glad to discuss that further with you.
The next question is, what tools are available in the industry for metadata management?
That's a really good question, and I don't have a slide that gives a good overview of that. We did one of those or not a couple of summers back, Megan. If you Google metadata tools, you will start to see them pop up on the internet, and that's a very good list to start from. Another great place to go, and I'll go ahead and put a plug for this one. We had a wonderful conference that we do once a year called Enterprise Data World. It'll be in Washington, D.C. at the end of March, and I can guarantee that any metadata vendor worth his will be at that conference exhibiting on the floor. So if you're thinking about looking at metadata tools, this alone is a good reason for coming to justify the cost of travel to DC and spending a week with us in DC talking about data topics, which metadata, of course, is hugely important as well. It's a great place to go. Most of the vendors have a booth set up so that you can sit down and play with the tool, learn about them, talk to people, talk to other people who've been using their tools. Again, just the opportunity to mingle with other people who are all sitting in the same boat is a really, really tremendous opportunity. So I don't have a list here that says here's the major category of tools. Gartner does that sort of services. And it's at Forrester, it's at many of the other advisory services. Those are great places to look. But like I said, Google it, and you'll miss the first couple things that come up. Very players, very good folks that are working with them.
All right, next question is, how do you start a metadata management program as the first step?
Again, I finished Tim Geithner's book. Tim Geithner, you know, is the former Treasury Secretary that got us through the financial crisis. And he starts out and says, every strategy ought to start out with a purpose. And that it applies directly here. Don't do it for the sake of doing it. Find a reason. Look around your organization. If your organization is performing very well, that would be terrific. Then some way of looking at improving that performance. But most organizations that we work with have deficiency in one or more of the areas that we described earlier about data management. By the way, again, I'll go back up to the slide here on this, since we've got a good internet connection and can actually things very, very quick. These areas in the DMMS structure is at a certain level, and of course all of them you can see relate to how metadata works in there. So your data governance area, your data strategy, your data operations, your data quality, your platform architecture, those 5 key data management practices all can be evaluated. And what you want to do is see which of those are not performing in a way that is dragging down the performance of the entire system. When you find that out, then you want to look and see if metadata is a potential solution to address that. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. For example, I can't imagine doing a data quality exercise and not all this at the same time doing metadata. It just be a comprehension for me in there. Again, from your data management strategy, if you don't know what your data assets are, how are you going to determine what your management strategy should be? And of course, your data management is usually a component of that data management strategy. Really good question there. I hope that was helpful.
Okay, the question is, how far have metadata tools there's come in being compatible with industry metadata standards? Are standard integration methods for data discovery make it easier for customers to implement?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. Again, it's a great question. The real key is that the vendors have absolutely not been sitting idle and have been working hard to make sure when a new standard comes out, most of the vendors will go around and pretty quickly incorporate into their tool suite their products. And by the way, we don't need a plethora of standards, even though we have a joke and say that the great standards is that there's so many to choose from. That's really not what it is. You're in the financial industry. There are set of standards that we use in the financial industry. If you're in manufacturing, another set of standards, retailing, but they're not always different either. Some of them use the same kinds of things that are there. But anyway, the vendors keep track of it because it's one of the selling points of these various products. Yes, absolutely. If you adhere to these standards, we also do, and that will make everybody's job a whole lot easier. Again, assuming that those standards are useful to you in your industry. You don't try and take a square peg and stick it in a round hole. It doesn't work. And if the standards aren't the right things, then you shouldn't be trying to apply them. It just makes everybody's job harder.
How long on average have you seen metadata retained for?
Well, I have every email I sent and received since about the year 1983. That may be the oldest example that I know of. That's the answer there, of course. This metadata management process that we've been able to go back and document is in the British Secret Service during the World War. The British discovered in 1914 that they were at war with much of Europe, and that even the fact that they were at war with much of Europe, there were 14 million Germans living in the United Kingdom. So the British Secret Service said, you know, we'd better develop something like a 3x5 index card with at least all those people's names on it. Imagine that maintaining 14 million 3x5 cards on individuals required them to develop some well-developed metadata practices. And it's a great book called The History of the British Secret Service. I don't have the reference right in front of me on that, but it's a terrific book, and it does dive into that history. So I would guess if we had to look, we'd be probably going back about 100 years to 1914 and looking at that. I don't know that that was exactly what the questioner was asking. Is it more on the lines of, you know, okay, so we got this ERP in, and we have all this metadata that surrounds the ERP, and we need to do it. We put it in 10 years ago, and now we're deciding whether to keep the metadata or not. That metadata is going to be stable. So I would probably sooner throw away data than I would throw away metadata. Or let's do it the other way. You know, many of you have heard Lewis and I talk about rot. Data rot in organizations, data that is redundant, trivial, or obsolete. And my argument is that when I see about 80% of organizational data fall into the category of being redundant, obsolete, or trivial, Lewis thinks the number is actually much closer to 5% in there. So if I had a choice of throwing away metadata or data, I'd probably just on pure numbers throw away some data before I'd throw away metadata.
Okay, the question is, often different areas in an organization do not agree on a common business definition. What's the best way to handle this scenario?
That is actually a data governance question. When you have disagreement, that's one of the best things that people can do. We did some work at one point in time for savings alone that literally the two senior VPs couldn't agree on whether sales were up or down that particular year. And the CEO came to us and said, you know, it sounds like a data problem, and I need some metadata management solutions to help me resolve that particular problem. It's just an absolutely crazy type situation. So it happen a lot. We have a lot of folks that are trying to do this kind of work, but if management doesn't understand what it is they're doing, and by the way, it's not our job to make management understand. It's our job to make ourselves understood. By that I don't mean you can't just, oh, they're not willing to sit down for, you know, a little lecture like this and learning from it. It's really about us to say, hey, metadata right now is kind of like sticking a bunch of CDs in iTunes and trying to develop a playlist based on track 1, track 2, track 3 information. You don't know whether you're putting on jazz or bluegrass or you know, rock or the Grateful Dead, right? If you don't know, it may help with your selection of your playlist. So what are you trying to do? Are you trying to set the mood for a romantic evening? Or are you trying to get people to, you know, have a rocking good time before a football team and get them pumped up? Or are you in fact setting up for everybody to just sit back for a nice quiet evening? These purposes are going to drive what you're going to put on your set list. And if you're trying to go out there with just song 1, song 2, you're not going to be able to be very, you're not going to ask to get play DJ. Let's put it that way. You're not going to get asked to play DJ anymore.
All right, great. The next question is, how do information or data architects typically make the best use of metadata that is successfully captured in the metadata repository?
Second half of that question separately. So architects intuitively, and modelers as well, intuitively know and understand how this is working. They know that when they put a definition out there for an entity in a term, but just as a little bit of metadata that I like to use, I don't like the term definition. Clive Finkelstein taught me that if we call them purpose statements, it's actually a little bit more useful than define something. Because if you define something, it sounds like an academic exercise. But if you say that this has a purpose statement, the reason we're collecting this information is because that is tremendously valuable information. in there. So architects and modelers intuitively know that what they're dealing with as they're moving concepts around on the paper is in fact the metadata structure that you need to have in order to develop the information structures that you need to run the business. The secondary effect is a little bit to show value out of it, but not hard at all in terms of when you get to do this. Now, I'll deal with the second half of the question. Again, the vendors love to sell you these products, and if they cost $1, I would say buy one of each and try them out. But they cost a fair amount of money. And so rather than you making an investment in something like that with an organization that is not well equipped to use, to understand, to be able to assimilate, if you will, all of that information into the organization, I would say let's just collect the metadata and put it in a spreadsheet. I know that sounds terrible, but I'd rather have good metadata in a spreadsheet than a $1 million investment in metadata that is seen as a failure because the organization isn't capable of using it on the scale it was designed to be used for. So our data modelers and architects are going to be very, very comfortable working with metadata. They're going to understand it when you talk to them about it, and they use it daily. On the other hand, the need for a repository solution is going to vary from organization and be successful correlated with the maturity of the organizational data management practices.
Well, the next question is, providing an ontology to start talking in the same terms a good idea in meta management?
Could you repeat that one again, Megan?
Sure. Is defining an ontology to start talking in the same terms a good idea in metadata management? Oh, well,
okay.
More actually, because there's a gap in concepts between technicians and business users.
So the question specifically is about ontology, and ontology deals with the structure of knowledge, and that's exactly right. It's probably almost exactly the wrong type of language to use. They may even throw the word taxonomy at people. They get really hinky because they think you're talking something over their heads or too technical for them. I love to introduce the term taxonomy into metadata practices. Is, first of all, don't ever let anybody in your organization define a concept as simple as customer. It's too high a level of abstraction. Tell them is that they should definitely look at talking about types of customers. For example, if we talk about current customers versus past customers, that'd be a very useful distinction for somebody, say, an automobile dealership, to say, should we send out advertising to our customers? And there is, well, if your customer bought your car last week and you're going to turn around and tell them the car they bought last week is now on sale, no, I think you're going to end up with more trouble than you're going to end up with new sales. On the other hand, if you can delineate your customers into these two types of customers, current customers and potential customers, we might want to tell our potential customers that certain cars are going on sale, and that our current customers, we don't want to inform them of that particular piece of information because they might all come back in and ask for the sale price on that car. Now, this sounds pretty easy. Okay, they get it. Customers is too high a concept. It's too levels of abstraction for us to deal with. So let's do metadata types that talk specifically about the type of customers. And we've got at least two customer types that we've identified, current customers and potential customers. Now I throw in the third term. What do you do with the concept of an ex-customer? And all of a sudden, their neat little taxonomy world of current and existing is a customer or a former customer, a current customer. Should we treat them like a current customer, or should we treat them like an existing customer? And that's where you can have a great discussion and discover something that will work well for your organization. So I don't know that I would even introduce the words taxonomy and ontology into the discussion, particularly when you're talking with business people, unless you happen to be working in the scientific domain, in which case they'll understand you perfectly well. But for most business people, those terms become a little bit scary because it sounds like science in there. So I'd keep examples simple, and I wouldn't tell them that what they're doing is this, but you might put it on the web page that's out there and say, you know, one of the things we're doing with this metadata that we're collecting and organizing is developing an organization-wide. Now, again, I'll go back to Nokia. Nokia said what we're doing is we're developing an organization-wide vocabulary so that everybody knows what you mean when you use this particular. And by the way, hats off to Nokia in particular, because here in this tiny country of Finland with 5 million people, Nokia told all of their employees that they needed to learn English because they were working in an English-speaking world. Not only did they have their term bank, but they had their term bank in a foreign language that most of them did not speak natively, but had learned that process. So again, very interesting group, very rewarding set of projects that we did out there for them.
Okay, looks like that's all the questions we have for today. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone, for participating in today's event. We hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks again to Dataversity and Shannon for hosting us. Once again, you will receive today's materials within the next 2 business days. Our webinar next month will be Data Warehouse Strategies. Hopefully, you'll be able to join us for that as well. As always, feel free to contact us if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Thanks, Shannon.
Guys, thanks to all of our attendees as always for great participation. And I echo Min's sentiment. Hope everyone has a great day.